Alright, welcome to the Rogue Nightmare build guide / demonstration of the Nuclear Igniter fire-based magic build. Now this build is ridiculously overpowered, and I mean in the sense that like it rappels apogee in terms of just pure destructive power. So we are going to use a combination of fire magic and dominance talents to deal absolutely ridiculous damage. Now, I would recommend having culling and about 40 to 50 avarice for this build. Now, you could try it with less, but it's going to be difficult to reach the critical point, which I'll discuss later, which is when you really start feeling that absolutely ridiculous power. There's two variants of the build, actually. If you check, like, in the description, and also in the original Discord post where this build was born, you notice there are two upgrade paths. This one, I'll be demonstrating the second path, Path B, with Fireball, but, I mean, you use both skills for both paths. It's just that you have different upgrade focuses, and they're for slightly different things, but they're basically identical, and the way you play them is very, very similar. So, we're going to be using two mechanics to do a lot of damage. The first one is just Dominance 4. The Dominance 4 talent, which is when you have 200 Dominance, allows you to deal, so 20% of all magic damage you deal to enemies is dealt to other nearby enemies. What that means is, let's say I have two enemies, and I hit both of them for 100 damage. Each enemy is going to share 20% of that damage to other enemies. So each enemy is going to take an additional 20 magical disintegration damage on top of the 100 other magic damage I dealt, which adds up really quickly for groups. If I have 11 guys in a group that are all near each other, I'm hitting for triple damage, which is ridiculous. And for that reason, this build actually is basically Nightmare Marathon exclusive. Because, well, we need a lot of card draws, and we also need a lot of enemies. You can see there's a lot of enemies here to get that Dominance 4 scaling off of. I mean, it's still overpowered and hard and normal. I mean, those difficulties are also just easier. But you're not going to have the same, like, comedic levels of destruction that you're going to see in this demonstration. So, we're going to combine Dominance 4 with another, also very broken, actually even more broken, power, which is the power of ignition explosions. So whenever you deal fire damage, most instances of dealing fire damage also inflict fire stacks on an opponent. This causes light DOT, but importantly, if you happen to get to 200 fire stacks on one enemy, they will explode in a large ignition explosion, which does a lot of damage, and more importantly, hits all nearby enemies. So let's say I apply 200 fire stacks to 3 enemies all standing nearby each other. Each enemy takes 100 damage from the fire explosion, and so that totals to 300 damage, right? Because each enemy explodes, hitting themselves and every other nearby enemy. That's 3 total ignition explosions in an area, 300 damage. So by hitting 3 enemies, we've literally tripled our damage, which is ridiculous. Right? But it gets better, because fire damage is considered magical, so we can abuse Dominance 4 to do even more. Using Dominance 4, 60% of that 300 would be, or 20% of that 300 would be shared among the other enemies, totaling to an extra 60 damage shared. And that 60 damage means that every enemy is going to actually take 420 damage. So with just 3 enemies in the vicinity, we turned 100 damage into 420 damage, which is insane, right? 4 times damage? You're going to be killing basically everything in one hit with that kind of damage. And that's exactly what we need. And in Nightmare, when you have 20 enemies grouped together, there is absolutely no chance for the enemies, because they're going to be taking hundreds of times the regular ignition explosion damage, which kills them in one hit. Basically all the time, no matter how large the party is. So to get a better understanding of, or rather, I guess I should explain further on how we're going to deal the fire stacks. So The reason is most fire builds don't utilize the principle of getting fire stacks on grouped up enemies like that. Or at least they don't do it in a way that is as destructive as it can be. So normally the only way you're going to be proccing 200 fire stacks on a group of enemies together is with Dragon's Breath. But Dragon's Breath has a pretty low AoE, meaning you can't hit a lot of things at the same time. And you can't kill a whole wave in one click of Dragon's Breath in a single tick. Which obviously is not necessary to be overpowered, but it's not the most optimal. So this is where Fireball comes in. Now Fireball has a base application of 75 fire stacks, and this will increase by 2.5 per level. So Fireball on its own is not capable of doing 200 fire stacks. It's only capable of doing 75, which means we can't get that ignition explosion. Or can we? Oh wow, oh wait, no, the game is just bugged, I see. Alright. Which means, at first glance, we're not going to be able to get that ignition explosion, and so we can't do the insane damage. But we have ways of increasing those fire stacks. If we upgrade Fireball, we get more fire stacks. There's also a trinket, which you just saw me select, called Flame of the Everpyre. Flame of the Everpyre is also going to allow me to do more fire stacks. And then there's also the Dominance 1 talent, which allows me to do even more fire stacks. And you can see these things add up pretty quickly. And it turns out that if we're using Dominance 1, and we have Everpyre plus 16, and Fireball plus 16, Fireball ends up doing 200 fire stacks, which is just what we need to get that critical, and this is what I call the critical point of Fireball, where we start to deal fire stacks, which literally multiplies our damage by the number of enemies we're hitting. So if we hit a lot of enemies with a critical point Fireball, we do hundreds of times of damage, which is exactly what we're looking for. With this tactic, we can nuke an entire wave in one hit, no matter how many enemies there are, and no matter how many people are in the party, because it's so much overkill, it just doesn't matter. So that's the core of this build, is being able to get that critical point of Fireball. So we need plus 16 Fireball and plus 16 Everpyre. And to do that, we're going to need to start culling cards pretty quickly. So in the first shop, you're going to see I'm going to do a lot of culling, and I'm also going to do a lot of buying, specifically of abilities and trinkets with the hope of getting Fireball. Now, this build also does use things besides just, regular good old Fireball. We use Dragon's Breath for bosses instead, just because there aren't enough enemies, and the fire application ends up having more DPS on bosses. This includes Vainglory, but it's not as effective because there's only one Vainglory. Oh, that was unfortunate. But it's still very effective. And, I mean, Fireball can, not quite one-tap bosses, but it can get them down to half health in one hit if they're all together. Which, I mean, is ridiculous on its own, a single click, right? The first part of this will always be the hardest. I happen to start with Wizard. Really, it doesn't matter what you start with. Well, you could start with Elementalist is what I'm saying, but it's not always the best choice, just because Elementalist is not as easy to play early game with, and you're not lacking in late game power at all, so you might as well go with Wizard. I also like Combat Teleport. You can see I'm already using it. It makes the game way easier because you can do much more fancy dodging maneuvers, so I tend to go for this, but you can use whatever you want. With Elementalist, you probably need a little less Avarice, just because it'll be easier to cull. You don't have to cull the whole Mana Darts tree, but to each their own there. So for that reason, we're going to end up culling abilities as much as we can in the first phase of culling. As you can see, that's what I was doing, because that culling is going to make it more easy to use this. So normally, I want to cull down just to 5 abilities in my deck. You can see right here, his abilities. There's a lot in here right now, but we're going to make that smaller so I can get Fireball every time. Now, we're going to need shop culling, so it is a little luck-based here, what we're doing, but normally it's pretty achievable. In terms of what we're culling, all these normal abilities, except for fire ones, we cull as soon as we get them. So I need heal. Don't cull heal before you have it. But once you have it, feel free to get rid of it. In fact, I'm going to cull Fire Strike because I already got it. And we do end up using it, but it's not particularly powerful. Alright, so this is, I mean, wow. This is a great roll. I'm actually going to take Dragon's Breath here just because it's so much rarer. But you could take Fireball there as well. Quicken is great. So the abilities I get on my hotbar are the ones you're going to want. I'm not going to talk too much about them just because they're not incredibly important. Actually, I have Incinerate. I should have equipped that one as well. I don't switch to Fire Strike until I have a little higher level book, because otherwise you do tend to run out of mana, which is just really annoying. I'm going to take Protect just so we don't die. But in general, you're going to take Everpyre and Fireball. Well, Fireball upgrades before Everpyre. You're gonna take Fireball upgrades before literally anything else, even things like Dragon's Breath, unless you're unlocking it for the first time. Because, yeah, that's why. Because Dragon's Breath is just broken, and that's path A of this build deals with Dragon's Breath, which is more balanced because you have more overall damage and is better for bosses. So use whichever path you want. Personally, I find the Fireball path cooler just because the overkill is really cool. You can get 10 million damage per run pretty easily in new coal waves in one click. But yeah, phase 0 is typically the hardest part just because we don't have much. As you can see now, I have, you know, like we're getting all the abilities. I have mana. So we're going to go for 75 dominance first, then 75 mana, then 200 dominance. And then we're going to get 100 Agi. I will get 75 Compassion and 75 Health, but you don't need either of those things. The important thing to note about this build is you don't need more than 200 Dominance, which is weird to think. I'm using a magic build. Turns out the fire ignition damage does not scale off of your Dominance. It scales off of enemy level. So, because the main damage we're dealing is fire damage, it's basically not important. And so that's actually a great example of what we're about to do. Right there, my Fireball triggered fire explosions, which is exactly what the Fireball in the build is trying to do. Now, the way we were able to accomplish this, ouchies, is so I'm playing with someone else right now, Dark Magic Long, who's pretty good. He's got, I think, a few 100,000 influence. But what happened there was he shot Fireball, inflicted less than 200, but a decent number of fire stacks, and then I shot my Fireball, which in total made the fire stacks go over 200 on every enemy, causing the critical explosion. And as you can see, it just completely demolishes everything you hit. I don't even have Dom 4, and it's still destroying everything. Dom 4 multiplies the damage by several times again, which is absolutely ridiculous. And another helper for this build is actually turns out to be... Oh, I got stuck. So, you can see the immense power of Fireball. Yeah. I'm not sure if he's actually using the build I'm displaying right now, but it doesn't really matter. One of these builds is all you need. So yeah, for bosses, Incinerate is great. The rest of our ability deck that isn't fire is mostly just utility. You're never going to want to be upgrading it. Sprint and Quicken for speed, heal for healing, Arcane Conduit in case you ever run out of mana, and obviously there's some sort of dodge roll. Now Incinerate is going to be your really good boss damage, and then for bosses you want to group them up because we can do that to them with Dragon's Breath, and Dragon's Breath shreds bosses. Ugh, I hate Cage. Because when they're all grouped together, you're just applying a ton of fire explosions. Are those really hitting me? Jesus. Oh my god, what am I doing? It's a little unfortunate. It's difficult to talk and play at the same time. I don't really know what happened there. But anyway. Ramble and dodge. Okay, we got culling again. That's amazing. We can just keep going. Now, you can actually cull things like Incinerate. I don't need Incinerate. I'm going to cull it. I'm never going to upgrade that ability. I know that for a fact, so I'm perfectly fine. Okay, don't cull Fireball. We have Quicken. We can cull it. Don't ever cull Dragon's Breath either. Dragon's Breath is a little too good to even for upgrading. I don't need Protect. Never going to upgrade that. So we're probably down to about 5. Okay, we're down to 2 abilities, so I overshot it. Doesn't really matter. Because we can do this. Now I can just spend a bunch of upgrades in Fireball, and we're going to start going for that target. Might even get it again here. We did not. I should have gotten Druid Staff. We have Druid Staff for even more healing, and also to proc some helpful speed-based abilities, like Pilgrim, once we get, that's why I got 75 Compassion. So this build ends up having a lot of speed, which most of the survivability. Because you still do end up being a 2 or 3 shot. I mean, it actually depends on what you're doing, but I said 16 because that's what I'm using right now. 16 is the magic number for this build. I should switch to Fire Strike now. Oh, and by the way, in terms of weapon, we are using Book because Book boosts all magic damage, which includes Fire Stack damage. So Fire Stack base damage is based on level, but other factors like the Opportunist talent, which I'll show in a second, or Book also further increase fire explosion damage, which is amazing. So that's why we use those things. And upgrading Book gives you more fire damage and more mana regen, which is also very helpful. I'm getting hit like the... Oh my gosh, I'm horrible. So anyway, we do have Dominance 4 now, so you'll notice there's a lot... I mean, we nuke groups. So we're looking to hit groups because we do much more damage to groups. Especially when we're hitting fire explosions. Okay, so right there was a great example of what not to do. He shot his fireball at nothing. Never shoot your fireball at soul targets. And really only at large groups, and really just at the start of a wave. You should be doing waves quickly enough that your fireball comes back. Your fireball doesn't even come back before the end of it. Like, look, we're going to beat this wave before my fireball is even back, and I'm going to go through these things. Look at that. It just barely came back in time. So it's important not to waste your fireball. In terms of what upgrades you're selecting, besides the necessities, just unlocking the abilities, don't take things if they're not Tome, Everpyre, or Fireball, or sometimes Dragon's Breath, even if you're running the Fireball variant. And the reason for that is simply because we don't need those things. We'd rather have the money to spend on culling or ability upgrades to get closer to the critical point for Fireball. Because if we don't do those things, we run the risk of not actually getting the build, which is really, really depressing. For fire elementals, note, fire damage not hurt them. We have to use Incinerate there or Mana Darts. Choose whichever one you want. But the priority of the build is always getting the critical point. That is the primary source of damage. It always will be, and under any cost, you should be trying to get that. At the end of the day, if you have nothing else but critical point, which is when the fireball hits for 200 fire stacks, you'll do enough damage anyway. It really doesn't matter. The other things that the build uses are just supplements to increase that damage even further, because if you're not running the optimized version, it's not a guarantee. I mean, you can see he didn't even have critical point. He just killed everything in one hit anyway. You run the risk of not killing in one hit in larger parties, or if the enemies are too sparsely spread out. So it's better to have the bonuses, but critical point is the bread and butter of the build. So, I mean, you might as well take Dragon's Breath when you see it, just because it is your main boss damage. Fireball can't really do that for you, so. And for Fireball, take your time aiming it, because the better you can miss pretty easily or not go for the right group, and that is going to hurt your damage a lot. And it's just not worth doing that. So it's always better to wait a second or two for them to conglomerate and get into position so you can fireball them properly. But we are doing great. I'm getting super lucky with these fireball upgrades. It's also because we called a lot. But fireball +9, Everpyre +4, we're getting there. See, I missed because I was a little too hasty. What we can do here is just, for bosses, you just want to get them together and use Dragon's Breath. That is going to destroy them basically immediately. The more of them are together, the quicker they will be destroyed. So just have fun melting bosses. Try not to get yourself killed. Other than that, go ham basically. We can use Quicken here too. Now I'll open with Fireball here just because I don't. There we go. Here's Dragon's Breath, and I mean they're just gone. Like look at that. The boss is deleted, right? And that's Dragon's Breath. That Fireball is not doing all that damage. It's doing some of it, but Fireball alone will not get you there. Now, once you're done with Dragon's Breath for those guys, you're just going to want to keep using Fireball and Incinerate as much as you can because there are still great sources of damage. In fact, Incinerate is amazing boss damage. So we did not get culling here. If you get a level buy, I tend to buy 1 or 2 levels, and if there's a reforge, you might as well get Will Fill. I'm so far along on the build that I'm willing to do some other things besides just solely go for the build. Go for a critical point. We're just going to get some Everpyre levels here. Won't quite spend all my money, but look, I mean, like, we're super close now. We didn't even get it during Phase 3. So for Phase 3, I really hope we get Boat, because Boat is a way quicker map. It's way more fun to play with this build, especially. We did not, which is really unfortunate, but whatever. we can still showcase the stupid power of this build anyway. And Fireball's amazing range, which sadly does not get upgrade level, is going to also be really helpful for hitting stuff here. So I do get 10 health, or not 10. I get, he still hasn't gotten Dragon, but that's unfortunate. 75 compassion for the point of this guy, and then we get 75 health just because I don't want to die. You don't need it. If I were solo, I might not take it, but there's just a lot of lives being lost. I'm also not playing great. As you can see, I have 3 deaths, which is not ideal. So get 75 health. Hell, even get like 150 if you really want to stay alive. You don't need to putting stuff in dominance will help a little for, like, it'll boost Incinerate's base damage, which is useful for things like Vainglory. Vainglory, that'll come into play for sure. I'll show you how to kill Vainglory with this build. It's really easy. Half the fight is just running in circles, but it's quicker if you have more dominance. We are almost at critical point. Critical point is, so you notice I'm not one-hitting everything with my Fireball. I mean, I'm doing a lot, but it's not killing them, especially when they're Fire Elementals. Nothing, well, actually, what happens with Fire Elementals will not change once I get critical point, but what happens, everything else will, and that'll be really, really fun to see. So you can see that there was another really bad use of Fireball. Now he's not going to have Fireball for when the round ends, and he's going to pay for that because he's not going to get nearly as much damage in. If we were on a if we were on a map like Boat, that could add up to some serious damage problems. Jesus Christ. So yeah, nulls are always going to be really annoying just because if you get spawned on, sometimes there's not a lot you can do besides, like, suffer horribly. The key is use Pilgrim for speed. I will use Fireball here because we still have to kill every null and all the skeletons, so it's going to come back before the round is over anyway. You can see, oh my gosh, that was close. See, it's going to be back, in fact. So, I'll show you we're very close. We're not quite there yet, but when I get it, also it'll be very clear that I have it. Critical point, that is. So you can see they're not one-hits there, but, I mean, okay. Incinerate will finish him off. So actually, getting Cram there is good, because, well, if he used Fireball, he would have been fine. He's not using it enough. But the more you're using Fireball, basically the more power you get, because Fireball's OP. Fireball, I'd rather have Fireball than Dragon's Breath, I think, just because of this little critical point thing we can do. So we're getting very close now. Now the one thing this build struggles to deal with are these guys, just because we do not have a good way of hurting them. Dragon's Breath doesn't do much. Oh, I should really take heal off of W. I accidentally canceled my Dragon's Breath. Just whatever. I didn't really need it for this, but... It's important to note you should... Like, I have heal bound to W because it auto-clicks, but if I use something during channeling Dragon's Breath, it'll cancel it, which is definitely not what I want. I'm not even that hurt anyway. I'll take that keybind. You should really take that keybind off the second you get Dragon's Breath. It's really helpful for early game. Really useless here. In fact, it's just an active detriment. So we'll just do that. Now I'll just put it on 2, so if I need to, I can, but I don't really need to. I mean, yeah, so you can see just kind of comboing our fire abilities together. Open with Fireball, go for Incinerate, use Dragon's Breath, go for Incinerate again, and 90% of the wave is dead. This one is bad because it's just enclosed, so you don't really get the nice juicy hits. It might actually be critical, I'm not sure. 16-16 is not an exact combination, it's just a close... It's just an approximation of what you're probably going to need. But other numbers, like if I have plus 20 Everpyre and plus 14 Fireball, it'll have the same effect. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, I'm actually going to wait a little bit here because I want Dragon's Breath to come back before we go start the fight, because when the bosses end up getting pulled away from each other, it's just going to be way more annoying to kill them, and it's going to be more of a time sink afterward. Just gonna do this, and we're just going to kind of win the fight. Oh my. Oh, I missed. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, the fire is just dominating. Get them together, you do even more, right? Now we're doing like 2.2x when there's just 2 enemies. It's absolutely, well, really, it's 2.4x. Absolutely ridiculous. So now I can say pretty confidently we're at critical point, and you're going to see what that means in just a second. It's going to be absolutely game-breaking. I'll get it to 16. You don't need it to get that high with such a high Everpyre. I'm going to get a little bit of Dragon's Breath. Now I'm going to get some levels, because levels also provide health, which is very nice. We're going to do some culling, so I can get Book. Book is now mainly what I want to upgrade, Book and Everpyre. But, and having a slimmer deck helps with that. But you don't need to be culling that much at this point once you have the thing. Now, don't upgrade Fireball anymore. You don't need to do that. Once you're at critical point, just go for more Everpyre, since Fireball upgrades are going to actually do basically nothing for you. You're not going to notice a difference in damage. So this is the best map. Okay, so sadly we got armors there, so can't do critical point abuse, but you'll see in a second what it looks like. This is the nicest map because sometimes it auto-detonates Fireball for you because projectiles are disabled because of the wind. And that will cause instant death, right? I mean, everything dies. And we can also still use Incinerate here, so just be sure to do that. And you can also use Dragon's Breath. So this map is the best because we want closer quarter maps, believe it or not, because everything dies before they can even hit you. And you'll see an example of that, hopefully right now. Bam. Wave is just about clear. There was one little outlier null there, so we didn't quite get a singular clear. And the wave is gone. So that is kind of the power of this build, is right now we can clear waves in a singular click. Now, I'm not going to have Fireball in time, so we're going to use Dragon's Breath instead to do something similar, and then we're going to use Incinerate once there's just Fire Elementals left. I'll use Fireball, and that is game. Upgrading Dragon's Breath is also good because we're going to need it for Vainglory. You'll notice he does not have critical point, right? He's not detonating that fire in one hit. He's inflicting fire stacks without fire explosions. So he does literally exponentially less damage compared to something like this, which clears out all the armors in one hit, not every enemy, because there are armors and elementals suck for this sort of build, but hopefully I can show you something like Terror Knights, which will be very, very satisfying to watch be absolutely decimated. Oh, we got elementals again. It's fine. Still works pretty well. Not the best demonstration, but it's still, I mean, you could see, like, we nuke some orcs pretty well. And the damage numbers in there, you can go back and check. I didn't look at them. They get really high. I've hit millions without trying with this build, and it's frankly hilarious. We don't need to upgrade Fireball anymore. Mini boss, just apply your buffs here because you're going to want it. As you can see, Fireball is a great starting damage source. Don't get hit by that attack. Just get rid of that. Just want to apply fire here constantly. Incin. Try not to miss the Fireball if you can help it. And everything else dies. More Everpyre, more fire we don't need. Fireball. Keep going here, right? We're going to use Pilgrim. Oh, I meant to click Sheath, but whatever. And yeah, so now we have decent health, so like that's great too. Hopefully we can kill Frigid before he... Oh, that sucks. We didn't quite get him in time, sadly. Oh my. And there goes the rest of the bosses. So if you're looking for the explicit math, this build scales with the cube of the number of enemies in the vicinity of each other. So if there are just 4 enemies, you're dealing like 50 times damage. Which is why we nuked all those bosses that were with the few skeletons in a singular hit. Which is, I mean, hilarious, but it's also just overpowered in general. So now we're just going to buy a ton of levels. And mostly upgrade. I bought more levels than book upgrades because you're going to realize pretty quickly that what we're really looking for here is dominance for this very last part. Because dominance increases Incinerate damage, which is going to be helpful. And that is... Let's hope he abides at that point, because I'll explain how this is going to work. We're going to use fire. We're going to use fire to take him down to 50%. He's going to get fire immunity. Then we're going to use Disintegrate. Now, Disintegrate deals disintegration damage and not fire, which is helpful because, well, she doesn't have immunity to that. So we can continue doing damage like that. But there's a unique bug with Incinerate that's called Fire Overstack. Basically, it allows you to get more than 200 fire stacks on her. And Incinerate increases damage by 0.75% for every fire stack on Bangalore. So Incinerate just allows you to do Fire Overstack. And watch. Oh, that's a very odd bug. Oh, there we go. 407. Look at that. 700 fire stacks. So watch. Bam. So when you use fire, you're popping the fire explosions. But right now, 400 fire stacks means 400 times 0.75%. Bam. Look at that. We did 5k damage, which isn't much, but like it's quite a bit. But bam. That was 14,000 damage. Look at Incinerate. Bam, that was like 20k. And the fire stacks just keep going up. 17k, right? So we can just keep abusing Incinerate here to keep doing more damage. If we did this the first half of the fight, she would get immunity by the end, and it wouldn't work. But if we do it like that, it just gets rid of the boss, basically, without you doing anything. And our end stats here are, 9.5 million is pretty standard for this build. A lot of kills, a lot of damage to bosses, not a lot of deaths. So you can see, we have similar influence, actually. You could see he had about 100 wisdom. He got 1.5k, or 1.5 million. I got 9.5 million. So there's a big difference between this build and regular fire builds, which is why you should use it, right? We're abusing Fireball. We're abusing even Dragon's Breath a little bit, right? With the strategy involved there. So I would highly, highly recommend trying this out. It's a super powerful build. It allows for easy, complete domination of literally everything. So yeah, I'll see you. I don't know if I'll see you guys again, but I hope this build guide helps and you get many, many kills. See ya.